Hey everyone, hi and welcome back to Adobe Live. My name is Anika and I'm your host today. We are in Pro Tips with Perspective Grids. So it's something new, something exciting that we're tackling. I don't think we've ever. And if you are someone who works in Adobe Illustrator all the time and has accidentally hit the Perspective Grid icon and just panicked, the stream is for you. Or if you're someone who's always wanted to draw a perspective Illustrator. This stream is also for you. So it's for you, and all of you. Thank you for joining me here both on Behance and YouTube. There is a live chat that we have going on both the channels. If you have any questions for me regarding Illustrator, perspective grids, make sure to put them in the chat, and our lovely moderator Sam will. I will also be reading the chat actively. So let me know if you have any questions. I do want to mention that after this stream, right after the 25-minute mark, we will hop on to Discord for a voice chat. So if you go in the stream description down below, there will be a link for you to join the Discord chat. This is the link right here. You can join at bit.ly/AI Discord. That's where I will be in the voice chat. You can ask me questions live and all right, before further ado, why don't we? I have some fun samples for you. I don't know if you've ever worked in perspective, but hey, there you go. So we have a 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, 3 point perspective. We're also going to be tackling text in perspective and maybe also illustration in perspective because why not? All right, so I do have a starter file of sorts that I have linked to moderator Sam today or moderator Sam today. So it has this tiny bit information. It's just for you to read. You don't necessarily have to use the same file, but just in case you wanted some resources, Sam can post them in the chat. But let me start by giving you examples of how it all looks like. So we have a 1 point perspective right here. I'm sure that you have seen and stood over here and seen that hey, this is 1 point perspective. We call it 1 point perspective because there is only one vanishing street and there's like these lines that are merging at this point, hence the 1 point perspective. We have a 2 point perspective right here. These are all pretty simple examples because I wanted to lay emphasis on the fact thing you want from the grid. So you don't necessarily have to create these same assets, but if you wanted you could, right? So this can be in perspective and this could be part of a bigger illustration. This is a perfect segue into what we learned last week with Jack Watson, who I know is also in the chat. We have we learned the isometric grids with Jack last week, the isometric illustration. So make sure to tune into those as well. But this is a good comparison with isometric objects and perspective objects. All right, this is 2 point perspective because clearly this line right here that we see is this is first vanishing point, and we have something right here which is the second one. All right, so we have these two lines going on right here. This is just me showing you, for instance, without the grids, how to recognize and identify how many vanishing points. Let's see what's wrong over here. Let me fix that real quick. Letting me know that. Also, hi. Let's see. Okay. Is this better? I don't know. Let me know in the chat if my audio. Here. Turn this down, all of it. All right. It should be good now. Let me know, Sam, if the audio and video is good now. Okay. I do want to say hi to the chat that I totally forgot to do. But hi, Sam. Hi, Elizabeth, Carol, Gareth, Jack, all the friends joining. I know we might need access to the file. So once the stream ends, I will give you all access to it. But it's essentially just this information. So this is the information. Um, And so we have all of this information right here, which is essentially the link that Sam already posted in chat. Sorry, I got distracted right there for a second. But let's see what 3 point perspective looks like. So this is what 3 point perspective looks like. It is kind of skewed here, but that's a stylistic choice that I made while using a 3 point perspective grid. And I also want to show you type in perspective. So this is something that I created earlier yesterday, which was essentially a 3 point perspective grid which had type made in perspective. You can also go ahead and change this type at the end, but I will show you how that's done. This is also 2D illustration in perspective. So if you have anything like an illustration that you created in the past and you wanted to create a fun perspective cube of it, you could. I think this would be a very fun way to show how this would work. And I know Richard in the chat says very Jetsons. Yeah, this is actually inspired. If you see the Tipsons is because we are in pro tips. But hey, let's dive into it. Why don't we? So one thing to know about perspective grids is that this is the button right here. My workspace right here. If I go to Window, Workspace, I can go to the Essentials Classic and you will be able to see this right here. It's the perspective grid tool. It also says that it's the Shift P. So if I click on it, we see this fun little icon right here. It's called the plane switching widget. Let me know in the chat if you guys have ever actually used the perspective grids. So this is how the default perspective grid looks like. And this is actually a 2-point perspective. This is the normal view that we have. This is a plane switching widget. We have the left plane, the right plane, and the bottom, which is the horizontal. And then we have all of these squares and diamonds and circles. And I don't know what this is. So if you want to jump out of this, and if this is not for you, you can just hit escape and that's it. You don't have to worry about anything. But if you actually want to learn and if you want to know how it works, you can press Command Shift I to show the grid again or Command Shift I to hide it again. So that's a pro tip right there for you. I also want to show you what these points really stand for. So we have the plane switching widget right here. This is our left vanishing point, and as I move it across, it's changing where these are falling. So this is a left vanishing point. We have a right vanishing point right here as well. This is how you can extend the grid, and since this is a vertical axis, this is called the vertical grid extent. Now, you don't really have to remember all of these names. You can just see what they do for you, and this is how anything for anyone really works. But I will start with telling you how these definitions are actually working. Okay. Let's see. All right. So yeah, so this is how you can extend your vertical grids. We have the grid extensions for the left hand side vanishing point and the right hand side vanishing point as well. If you look closely, this is my origin point, and if you look closely, as I hover over this icon, it actually changes the cursor to an O, which shows me that this is the origin point. Sorry about that. That was kind of jarring. I just like clicked out of my artboard everywhere. Hold on. Oh, this accessibility sometimes kind of goes jarring. All right, so we have this, and I'm actively looking at chat just to make sure that I'm not missing any questions. So this is our default view. We have the ground level here. This is our horizon line. We have the origin right here. This is how I can change how the right vanishing point and the grid works in this. The vanishing point remains constant, but the grid essentially moves here. So that's also a fun thing. You can go to view, perspective grid, and see all of these options. You can press Command Shift I, which is what I did right here to hide the grid. That's what it does. To show it again, you can do the same thing, Command Shift I. We have show rulers, which is a fun option because you can essentially make real world objects in perspective in Illustrator. So if you're doing something who does perspective by as something in your work, you can essentially go here, extend the ruler, and this is how you can set it up. So you can go to view, perspective grid, and you can go to define a grid as well. So if I click on define a grid, I can essentially define a custom preset just as you can with brushes and color swatches and all of the things in Illustrator. You can define a custom preset. You can change what kind of perspective it is. So if I have a 1-point perspective, I can change the units that I'm using as well. So let's say I'm using inches. I can change the scale here as well. These are all the default options that I have. So I have 1:100, 1:50, and this is going to change the scale for your artboard. So one artboard would be 1:1, will be one artboard is 1 in real life. But if you change the scale, it's going to change depending on what you choose for real world. And then we have the grid line. So by grid line, I mean this line right here. So if I go back to perspective, define grid again, we have the grid line right here at however many points, right? You can also change the viewing angle because it's not necessarily 0 degrees here. We are viewing the perspective grid at a 45-degree angle. So that's what this is. There's a viewing distance, which is essentially how far the horizon line is from the viewer. We have the horizon height, and you can also customize the colors for the left, right, and the horizontal grid. I am going to leave it as default just so that it's not too jarring for anyone who's watching. And from here, you can also change the opacity. All right, without further ado, why don't we jump into creating something in 1-point perspective so we can actually show you how it works. These were the basics of how you can essentially use and what are the controls so that you don't get really confused when you see it. So if you have any questions about these controls, let me know in the chat. All right, for now, I'm going to go to view again. and go to perspective grid, go to 1 point perspective, and go to 1 point normal view. And this is going to change how my perspective grids look. And we have this is the one vanishing point that we have in 1 point perspective. I can change how far further up it looks from the viewing angle. So I'm going to keep it this way. I have this guy right here, which will help me move the perspective grid instead. I can change the grid distance, grid lines, every how many distance there are. So if I zoom in right here into my screen, you can see that it's changing, right? And then I can also change the angle of how the street's going to look like. So you might be wondering that this is just perspective, like this perspective grid is also like just on one side. So how do I essentially create something that's on both sides? So if I'm going to actually double click on this to show you a few more options before we dive in. So we have perspective grid options right here. And if I hide this, it's not going to show the active plane widget, which is right over here by default. When you click Shift V, and then we have automatic plane positioning. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But we also have the grid positioning. I'm going to actually bring this up on the side here so that I can access it easily. We have the perspective grid and the perspective selection tool. So once I have the selection tool, you can see that as I move along this switching plane, I can essentially press 1, 2, or 3 on my keyboard, which is essentially going to change what perspective plane I'm in. So I'm in 1, 2. This doesn't have like a third, which is the right hand side here. So this is because this is 1 point perspective. I have 4, which is going to change it to no plane in here, right? So that's something handy. I hit escape by default. I just happen to do it. But why don't we press M on the keyboard and just create something right here? So you might be thinking, what is this weird shape? Now, this weird shape is essentially a building. It's the front of a building, and this is how you can create multiple shapes. I can also do the same on this side. Since my active plane is the left-hand grid right here, it's going to do the same thing on the other side as well. And I think it's like super easy to do something like this. I can switch over to this side and see what happens. I can create something like this, which can essentially be the other side of the building. So let me go ahead and change the color of this a little bit. I'm going to make it a darker blue for now. And I am going to draw something here. So we have this building right here, and these can be this color. I can go back to my blue color again. Sorry, didn't mean to have it selected. Now, I see that this is kind of like the space over here is kind of jarring, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go back to my perspective selection tool again, and I'm going to bring it up till here and try to see if that works. Now, this doesn't work in this case because this is a 1 point perspective grid and there is no right plane. So it's essential that you make sure what perspective grid you're in and think about moving the objects that way. Now, you can also duplicate the objects within a perspective grid. So if this is a 1 point perspective grid, I can essentially use my perspective selection tool, press Option if you're working on a Mac, or Alt if you're working on a Windows device, and essentially object duplicate it, right? So I can just put this anywhere I want in my perspective grid. Okay. Yes, General Kenobi. All right, I'm just looking in chat if I am missing any questions. All right, so we have something going on here, which is like 1 point perspective. If I hit escape, before I actually hit escape, I'm gonna press the perspective selection tool, go to the horizontal view, press M on my keyboard, and essentially make something like a street view here. So I have something like this. It is I think snapping is turned on, that's why it's doing this. But I have this street view right here. I can go to the perspective selection tool and then extend it to the end. I don't really need to make it till the end. I have the option of using the perspective selection tool to make it super precise later on. So that's something for your 1 point perspective. This is essentially when you work more on it, it can look like this later on. Trust me, I've tried. But there is one thing to remember, that when you create a perspective grid in Illustrator, that is essentially just the one perspective grid you're creating. You can't have multiple active perspective grids in Illustrator at one time. So you will have to go to perspective grid again and change it to 2 point perspective, and the same perspective grid is going to change. right? So that's something that's kind of like a default preset that we have. We cannot change here. Now, this one here is a 2 point perspective. And what we saw in the 2 point perspective was essentially a bookcase that I drew. And you can do that. This is a default. I think I changed it just a little bit to show the top and the angles and to show some depth. And I have this right here. And all of these were again using the rectangle tool right here. So I am again in the perspective grid tool. I also have the perspective selection tool. What I can do here is press M on the keyboard. I can just press V first and press M on the keyboard. I have an active plane right here, which is what it's creating. I am going to hit escape. I want to create some rectangles first that I can use in my design later. So I'm just going to pop in some rectangles. Maybe I'll change the color palette right here. I'm going to get something like this over here, and then I can just change the color. So I'm going to use the eyedropper tool to get all of these colors. And then I'm just going to change the brightness to get like a darker tone here. And then maybe I'll just get like a beige sort of a situation going on. All right, so we have this. I'm going to press Command Shift I again on my keyboard. And then I'm going to use the perspective selection tool this time and bring this in here. So I have this object right here. And you can see as I move this within the grid, because the horizontal plane is active right now that I can see from my plane switching gadget, I see that, oh, oops, Illustrator does it again. I see that this is essentially where it works. So I am going to bring it here. I can see that I can move it anywhere for the left vanishing point or towards the right vanishing point, and it's going to change it automatically. Now, there is another thing that I really want to show you is that I want to create something in perspective. It's a 200 by 200 square, but I don't know how the dimensions are going to change. I don't want to do the math. I want Illustrator to do the math. So I am in the, let's go to the right switching plane for this example. I'm going to press M on the keyboard and I am in the perspective grid. I'm just going to click this guy and I'm just going to say 200 points. I'm going to click OK, and this is how it looks. This is the 200 by 200 square that I created here, and this was in perspective. This was obviously far off where I clicked the rectangle tool, but you can essentially create something if you have real world dimensions, and if you have exact dimensions, you can do that here as well. Okay, let's go ahead and create like a book situation here. So I have something here, and then I can go ahead and create something on this side. We have something like this maybe, and then I can go ahead change the color. Now this is not exactly how I wanted it, so I can go ahead and change the sizing of it. I can go ahead and bring it here, and meanwhile, while I have the perspective grid selection tool, I don't really have to switch planes. I can just click on the object, and if you notice this guy really carefully over here, the plane switching gadget, it's going to change it as soon as I click on it. So I don't really need to change any of this. All right, and then I'm going to press I on the keyboard. I'm going to go up a little bit. I'm going to change the color right here and press paste. So we have something like a book going on here. I'm going to change the dimension a little bit. Maybe I'll just make this taller. Yeah, and then what I can do is essentially go to a layer underneath maybe, and then I can create another one. So I have M on my keyboard and I have something right here. I don't really need like the front of this, but maybe I do later on. So I'm just going to let it be. I'm going to have this right here. I'm going to check the time real quick just to make sure we have everything focused. All right. Making sure we have everything in chat with in terms of questions. So if you have any questions for me, again, if you're watching this on YouTube or Behance and just joining in, we are going to be on the Discord voice chat later. This is where the voice chat will happen. So we will be at bit.ly/AI Discord. So if you have any questions for me, let me know and pop them in the chat, or you can join the live chat later on. So we have this guy right here. I can change the sizing of it, make it anywhere I want. So maybe this is the other book that we have. I have the perspective selection tool right here again. And then I'm going to switch the plane again and press M on the keyboard and see what we have here. Okay, I guess we'll just keep it till here, okay? And then I have I on the keyboard. I'm just gonna change the color. Hit escape, and that's how it looks. Now, this doesn't have any depth. So if you wanted depth, what you can do is add another copy of this and add something like a color difference depending on where you put your light source, and you can just duplicate it while you're in the perspective grid. So I am in this perspective grid and I can duplicate it anywhere I want, right? Okay. All right. This was the 2 point perspective grid, and now we're diving into 3 point perspective grid. For the sake of time, I'm not going to be creating objects like this for the 3 point perspective. I am just going to dive into creating something like a text flyer or something in 3 point perspective. So let me just hit delete to all of these, hit escape because we don't want the 2 point perspective. And then I'm just actually going to go to view perspective grid, go to 3 point perspective, and click on 3 point normal view. Let's zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to get these colors out of the way here. And I have some assets right here for use later, but this is also another funky representation that I made. Oh, this is a little bit skewed, but it was supposed to say Adobe Live. Clearly, it's not doing that right now, but I'll find one to end the stream. So this is the perspective grid for the 3 point normal view, and I can move it across in my artboard anywhere I like. So this is where the artboard is, and I have the 3 point perspective. I have some text. I know some of us really want to make some typographic posters, so you can probably make perspective typographic posters, right? I have this right here, which is all the information I need. I am going to bring it up top so that we can see clearly what we're working with. Let's see. I am actually going to duplicate this. So press Option, hold and drag just so that I can see what we're working with. We have Adobe Live right here, and I have the perspective grid selected. Now, again, you can essentially go into your perspective grid and press 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard, which is going to switch this. If you look carefully, once I press 1 on the keyboard, it's going to switch it to the left plane, 2 is going to switch it to the horizontal, and 3 is going to switch it to the right plane, right? So I have this right here, and I just want to select this guy and bring it in whatever artboard I am working in, right? So let's go ahead and have this selected, and then I'm going to go to my perspective selection tool, and then I want to bring it in here. Now my right plane was selected, which is why I do see that this is right here. You can zoom in right over here, hold shift, and it's going to retain the constraints. Now you're wondering, what if I made like a typo in this, right? What if I made something like Adobe Lives instead? Or what if I wanted to write live streams? I can go to object, I can go to perspective, and I can actually go to edit text. Now, if I go to edit text, it's going to let me change whatever I have here. So I can just write live streams instead here, and that's going to help me change the text in perspective. I didn't have to release the perspective. It was right there. So you do not have to do any of it, and you can change the text is still live. I think that's brilliant. I think this tip is really a lifesaver for me. I do also have all of these other text boxes that I can use. So I have this guy right here, which is Pro Tips with Me, which is what we are doing today. I have one question in the chat from Alessandra that I'm going to answer at the end of the stream, but I'm just going to quickly switch my plane right here to the left one. I have all of these selected right here, and then I'm going to bring it up over here. Okay, and now I can zoom in again, and I can bring this up right over here like this. And if I click out of it, that's how it looks. And the last thing I'm actually going to do is bring this text, which is actually your call to action for today. You can join us on the Discord, which is where we're going to have the live chat. So once the stream ends, which is in about a couple of minutes, you can join us over on bit.ly/AI Discord, which is where we will be chatting live. So yeah, there you go. That is how you can make your text. Now, I think this is super small, so I can resize it. But once I actually resize it, it's going to give me an error. That's your last tip for today. The perspective object will be expanded in order to perform this operation. If you bring anything out of the perspective grid, change the sizing, or try to do anything, it's going to release it from the perspective grid unless and until you use the perspective selection tool. So instead of doing the destructive editing, I'm going to hit okay, I get it. I'm gonna hit Command C here, and then I'm gonna paste it on the side, and I have a copy here. Now the perspective grid remains in one single area, so I don't need to worry about how it's working. And that's your call to action for today. Alessandra had a question, said, "This is awesome. What is your favorite part?" My favorite part is actually the non-destructive editing, like Elizabeth in the chat says. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me here live. If you want to hang out with us in the Discord voice chat, don't forget you can hang out with us here. All right, I'll see you soon. Bye for now.